Hello. So, thought today we could talk a little bit about Celtic spirituality, or Celtic Christianity, and its relationship to farming. It's in particular biodynamic or organic farming. Um, Now it's interesting. I'll just read you a little thing from Saint Patrick, who was not Irish himself, but was a Roman Briton. But he, as you may know, was captured as a boy and made it by pirates and sold into slavery in Ireland. And he came to love the Irish and came to know Celtic culture. And here's what he said in his address or letter to the High King of Tara. Our God is the God of all men, the God of heaven and earth, of sea and river, of sun and moon and stars, of the lofty mountain and the lowly valley, the God above heaven, the God in heaven, the God under heaven. He has his dwelling around heaven and earth and sea and all that in them is. He inspires all. He quickens all. He dominates all. He sustains all. He lights the light of the sun. He furnishes the light of the light. He has put springs in the dry land and has set stars to minister to the greater lights. Right? And you can get a sense right there that this is not here's a joke. This is not your garden variety Christianity. And so the Celtic, it's a very different thing than either Roman Catholic, and even though the Celts are Roman Catholic, even though like Roman, Italian Catholic, French Catholic, English Catholic, even those are all beautiful expressions, or Eastern Orthodox. Because the Catholic and Orthodox, mainstream Catholic, we could say, we'll call it the Celts fringe Catholics, is heavily invested in this idea of martyrdom, right? Terry Eagleton, the great literary critic, he's really well worth reading. I can't stand a lot of his opinions, but he's really a great writer. And he's really got an Irish intellect and wit to him. And he says something along the lines: if you're a Christian and don't end up martyred, apparently you have something to answer for, which is certainly something you get from both Eastern and Western Christianity. This idea that it's you got to die for the faith, which I get that. I get dying for your convictions, but let's not make it an end in itself, okay, boys and girls? Because I think that it tends to become pathological, actually. And actually, I think you see the same thing in Islam with not, of course, not every iteration of Islam, but the martyrdom, the love of martyrdom. We will die for Allah, right? That kind of stuff. It's it's little, it's like a little psychotic. I'm just saying. But the Celts, on the other hand, have don't have a martyrdom tradition. They have an ascetical tradition, meaning, and it's probably because the Celtic form of monasticism seems to have come from North Africa by way of the south of France, and then kind of filtered up to Ireland in that way. So that's one. It does have asceticism, but it doesn't have this idea of martyrdom. And with asceticism, you get the tradition of hermits, right? And there were a lot of Irish hermits. But what's not like Eastern Christianity or Western Christianity, mainstream, is you also have in the Irish tradition, there's kind of a stream, you can say a little DNA of the Druids, right? Of the love of nature, of seeing nature as inhabited by gods, but transposed into a Christian idiom. That's, as we saw with St. Francis's passage, nature is inhabited by God, surrounded by God, right? And also, all things speak of God, right? They're all infused with God, right? And it's an important notion because this really creates a very different spirituality if it's based on that. You really don't see that in the West, probably till Hildegard of Bingen and uh, St. Francis of Assisi, who also embraced nature in a way that was not typical, right? Until that time. I mean, it really was a big change in the late Middle Ages. And um, but the Celts are just full of this stuff, and it's now the thing is, I have to back up. We can't really know what Celtic Christianity was because we don't. No one was filming. There's nobody to interview, but we do have a lot of writing, and part of the Druidic DNA of Celtic spirituality that has come down to us is a wonderful wealth of poetry, right? Not just a love of nature, but a love of the arts and of poetry. And of course, if you know, like the Book of Kells and that extraordinary knot work, the interlacing um, knots that decorate the Book of Kells and Book of Lindisfarne, they're just extraordinary, and that is another sign of what the values of this culture were. Now, pardon me, I'm dying again. Um, and the other thing I should say with Celtic Christianity, Christianity in the East and in the West was really an urban phenomenon, right? If you look at St. Paul's letters, he's writing letters to people in the major cities of the Mediterranean at the time, right? Corinth or Ephesus or Rome, right? Letter to the Romans, and so Christianity was an urban phenomenon, and it's even back then it was urban was different than rural, and whereas Celtic Christianity, there were no cities to speak of. Dublin was not a city for hundreds of years after the establishment of Christianity, so it was a very rural religion. And you read the lives of the Irish saints, and Saint Bridget in particular. She's, the legend is that she was the midwife for the Virgin Mary at the birth of Christ, and how could that be? She lived long after Christ. Well, the idea is she time traveled. That angels brought her as a girl to be the midwife for the Virgin Mary. So, and she's the patron saint of midwives. So it's an embrace of life, of livingness, which is something. Let me pause this for a second. Sorry about that. My dog was barking in the next room. I had to tell my son to let her out. Speaking of nature, right? So this Celtic spirituality was grounded in nature, in poetry, in the arts, asceticism to a degree. But as I was saying with Saint Bridget, fertility. I'm not. And some people would say that Saint Bridget was actually an appropriation of a Celtic fertility goddess. And I'm like, so what? Maybe she is, maybe she's not. That's immaterial. The thing is, the stories are about fertility in life, and there are miracles of milk and finding cows and making things grow, making beer. Gotta love that, right? With Saint Bridget. So it's an important thing that we have lost. Now, it's in the 1970s, I would say, through the 80s. I don't think it went much longer after that. There was the Lindisfarne Association, if you've heard of them. Christopher Bamford was part of that. Kathleen Raine, the great poet and Blake scholar, was part of it. William Irwin Thompson, it's kind of a wild man. He was part of it, but a lot of people that were involved with it. And they were really interested in kind of a retrieval of some of these aspects of Celtic spirituality. And in fact, that book I just read from right here, Celtic Christianity, Ecology and Holiness, was put together, as you can see, by Christopher Bamford and William Parker Marsh, whom I don't know. But I knew Chris, not really well, but we corresponded often before his death. And he wrote this beautiful book. If you want a beautiful book, wrote this book called An Endless Trace, which I encourage you to try to get a hold of. Not only because the information is good, but he's really, really a good writer. And I am an editor. I make a lot of money from, well, not a lot, but I make a lot of my living from editing. And I'll tell you right now, good writers are few and far between. But Chris was one. He really was. So this Lindisfarne, these guys were trying to retrieve a Christian ethos that embraced nature and embraced the arts. And that's absolutely a noble thing. But here's what happened, right? Over time, the Celtic Church was kind of absorbed by the Roman Catholic Church, because there was a very different, had a different liturgy in the Celtic Church, a very different spirituality. But as the Roman Empire grew and the power of the Roman See grew, eventually the Celtic Church was kind of absorbed because it was much smaller, absorbed by the Roman Catholic Church, and which was probably not the greatest thing in the world. I mean, we lost a lot in that way. Even though it needs to be said that at least through the modern, into the early modern period, this is even after the Reformation, that the Catholic Church did still maintain and this is where farming comes in, the kind of intersection of the church year, the church liturgical year, with the agricultural year, or the cosmic year, you could say, aligned with the cosmos. And I'm speaking mostly, of course, of the northern hemisphere. And it's interesting, by the way, if you look at a globe, how little of the population of the Earth is in the southern hemisphere. It's really weird if you think about it. You would kind of assume that it's kind of evenly distributed. It's not. So it's kind of an interesting, it would be worth unpacking that at some time. I don't know if I'm up to the task. But anyway, so the church was tied into the agricultural year, the church year. Now, for example, tomorrow, November 11th, is Martinmas, right? The feast of St. Martin of Tours. And on that feast, one of the folk customs is, and I think still is to some degree in places like Germany, is to go on a lantern walk. And actually, Waldorf schools still maintain this, even though they don't know a damn thing about Christianity anymore. But they keep these kind of folk festivals going, which God bless them for that, right? And the lantern walk, so my kids, we would make lanterns out of jars or paper. They'd be about this big, a little candle in there. Or you can also make a lantern out of a turnip, which is a nice thing. So the idea is the darkness is coming, right? And we need to kindle a light against the darkness. And this also persists into next month at the feast of St. Cecilia, right? Or St. Lucia, sorry. St. Cecilia is also November, but Santa Lucia, if you've probably seen the wonderful custom of a young girl playing the part of Saint Lucy, whose name means light, and wearing a crown with candles on it, and bringing cakes and coffee and other hot chocolate to people. And it also is another way to enter into the darkness of the year. I think it's December 13th. Now, of course, then we come to Christmas, where everything closes down. But then we have, of course, in Christianity, the birth of the light of Jesus Christ. And you can see, and then as the year goes on, everything is so connected to the agricultural cycle. And I'll just, not without going into the whole thing, though I probably should at some point do the whole bit. At St. John's Day, which is June 24th, which coincides with the summer solstice, the idea of having bonfires. which in a way you could, it's interesting what happens around that time to plants, because I'm a farmer, I pay attention to stuff. So until St. John's Day, plants kind of do this. They go straight up, right? And what at St. John's Day they kind of explode and kind of become chaotic, and the leaves go out, start spreading out all over the place, like tomato vines will go. But until then, they're kind of just going straight up. Annual plants, I should say. Um, and I think there's kind of an interesting thing in American culture, anyway. A kind of reflection of that is a feast, a secular feast that comes right after St. John's Day, which is the 4th of July. And if you think about fireworks, they go straight up and they go chaotic, right? Or they blossom, they burst, which is the same thing that nature does at that time. And I've been paying attention to this for a long time, and it's never fails. Interestingly enough, um, around Michaelmas, which is the 29th of September, you start to see another phenomenon happen where those annual plants start to cut themselves off from the earth. So if you see a plant, right, and the leaves at the bottom start to die off, and it's as though the plant is giving itself to the cosmos and giving itself to death, really, because most of those annual plants have produced their seed by then, and that's the job of a plant: produce seed, and then you're done, right? So, but it's interesting how you see it kind of cut itself off from the earth when the lower leaves and things start to die off. It's kind of fascinating. So I encourage you, brothers and sisters, pay attention to what nature does. It's really it's a cipher for our own spiritual lives, and I think that's one of the great wisdoms of the traditional Catholic Church, is that was maintained for the longest time. So to go back to the Celts for a second, I'm going to read you a little passage from one of my favorite books. At first I read it, I liked it, but over time it's like one of those, you realize, wow, this book still speaks to me. This is still living in me. And this book, the book I'm talking about, is The Catholic Thing by Rosemary Haughton, who I think she's still alive, and maybe she's 100 years old by now. And she talks a lot about these kinds of things. She's kind of a hippie Catholic writer, even though she was kind of older than the hippies a little bit. But she's got that kind of appreciation for the bohemian, right, of the wild side of Christianity, which I'm all about. Let's make Christianity wild again. Here's what she says, though, about the Celtic Church. It was a formidable achievement, and it meant that the distinctly Celtic type of spirituality fed into the mainstreams of European culture, and the nations and cultures which absorbed it later contributed to the making of America. Although the great Benedictine and Roman type of Catholicism, which I'm talking about, finally absorbed them, and now it dominates our imaginative view of the Catholic cultural origins because of its architecture, its music, its continued presence. The lost Celtic Catholicism was uniquely important in its embracing quality, its feeling for the presence of the divine in natural beauty, and in the unexpected, its single-minded devotion to the quest for God, and its sheer wealth of symbol and fantasy. And fantasy is a really important word there. Like the Grail legends, right, are very Celtic in origin. If you read the Mabinogion, it's also rich in imagination. And as I said in an earlier video, the one I did on Other Worlds, I don't think those writers were, as Tolkien said, I don't think those writers were making things up. I think they were describing things, right? They were taking notes about reality. So when they would talk about these miracles and these saints, I don't think they were making stuff up. I think they were descriptive. Okay. And this is an important development through the right book. Okay, through the history of Christianity in the British Isles. But I'm going to give you another poem here. This is just a random poem that was collected by Alexander Carmichael in the book called the Carmina Gadelica, Hymns and Incantations. So he went through Scotland mostly, picking up all these folk prayers and chants and spells and what have you. And this is the late 1800s, early 1900s. It took him a long time. And this is actually ended up with 5 volumes. So if you, I think 4 or 5 volumes. So if you had the first edition, which I would love, I can't find one. It's a beautiful thing, and this actually has all in there, but it's not as cool because it's paperback and it's whatever. And I'm not crazy about the artwork on the cover, whatever. But here's this poem, right? God of the moon, God of the sun, who ordained to us the Son of Mercy, the fair Mary upon her knee, Christ the King of life in her lap. I am the cleric established, going round the founded stones. I behold mansions, I behold shores, I behold angels floating. I behold the shapely rounded column coming landwards in friendship to us. I mean, that's my kind of that's my kind of Christianity right there. Yeah. So I mean, just imagine though, if, and this is why I think the Lindisfarne people, to their immense credit, we're onto something, because. And I think all of these things I've been talking, all this Celtic Christianity, it's very sophiological in import. I mean, it's because my understanding of Sophiology, it's not a definition. My understanding of it is that this is a spirituality that is the kind of, inhabits the space between heaven and earth. Or the creation, right, in the realm of the angels, and Sophia is the kind of we call the metaxu, the between, who makes that possible to our senses to sense the divine, and I mean sense like taste or see or hear, right? It's kind of a catalyst for making that happen. That's the way I understand it. But pardon me. So this is, in my work as a farmer, though, this kind of ethos, this kind of epistemology is extraordinarily important because, like the Celts, I think, my wife and I, when we work with the land, we are very conscious of the redemptive work of the kind of farming we're doing. So we're biodynamic farmers. So compost is a big deal. We don't use chemicals of any kind, and so it's wholesome in that way. But we're very, very cognizant of the fact that when we work with the earth, that we're working with a substance that the blood of Christ at the crucifixion, the blood and water of Christ, if you ask Sergei Bulgakov, the Russian theologian. But when the blood of Christ touched the ground, touched the soil at Golgotha, it rejuvenated the earth. Right? It gave to the earth, and Rudolf Steiner says this too. Rudolf Steiner says, had it not happened, the earth would have just ossified and turned into like the moon. But Christ's blood rejuvenated the earth itself. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Okay? And another thing you'll see in Celtic spirituality, and this actually came up at St. John's Day, because a friend of mine who's interested in connecting, this connection between the agricultural and the spiritual year, you could say, or the cosmic year. He wrote me and he said, "Hey, St. John's Day is coming up. Are there any Celtic prayers about St. John the Baptist?" I'm like, you know what? I don't recall seeing any, and I still don't recall seeing any. Which is weird because you would think they would St. John the Baptist, who was a wild man, he was like Enkidu in a way. He was, you could have he was living kind of in between. Well, he's only been in the wilderness, a voice crying in the wilderness, right? Make straight, right? Make straight the way of the Lord. I mean, eating locusts and wild honey. That's woo. Yeah, I mean that guy was wild. But he doesn't really show up too much. I don't think I've ever seen one reference to him in Celtic writings, but there might be some out there. And if you know some, let me know, because I would really like to know. But you know who does come up all the time? St. Bridget. Virgin Mary, and the Archangel Michael. So I'm going to read a little bit. This is also a very cool book. I'm going to get this book, Celtic Spirituality, put out by Paulus Press. They do often things, and I think I'm trying to remember who put this one out. The editors were Oliver Davies with Thomas O'Loughlin. Thomas O'Loughlin, I don't know where Davies teaches, but O'Loughlin was at Nottingham University, I believe. He may have retired. But this is from a longer Welsh devotional text. It's the Litany of Creation. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you'll get a sense of what I'm talking about here, right? I beseech you by the 10th order of the compact earth. I beseech praiseworthy Michael to help me against demons. Together with Michael, beseech you by land and by sea unceasingly. I beseech you respectfully by every quality of God the Father. I beseech you, O Lord, by the suffering of your body, white with fasting. I beseech you by the contemplative life. I beseech you by the active life. I beseech the people of heaven with Michael for my soul. I beseech the saints of the world to help me on earth. I beseech the people of heaven with bright-armed Michael. I beseech you by the triad of wind, sun, and moon. I beseech you by water and the cool air. I beseech you by fire. I beseech you by earth. I beseech you by the threesome of the vaulted and the fiery zone. I beseech you by the 2 temperate zones. I beseech you by the 2 frozen zones. I beseech you by the compass of the harmonious firmament. I beseech every order dignified in its divisions, the host of the bright stars. I beseech you by the kings with their royal and mighty line of kings. I beseech you all mysteries. I beseech the glories of Michael. I beseech you by every living creature that ever knew death and life. I beseech you by every inanimate creature because of your fair and lovely mystery. And I'll read the one more. I beseech you by your love, deeper than the ocean. I beseech you, your very self, O King of the fierce sun. Now you can see, right, that's what I've been talking about. The heavenly realm and the earthly realm are not only touching, but they're intersected here. And this is, here's what I think. I think without such a point of view, without such an epistemology, without such an ethos, I think Christianity is probably doomed to fail. I mean, to vanish from the face of the earth, because this has been sadly missing from most iterations of Christianity for a long time now, which has become urbanized. And I think recently, I can't remember, somebody wrote about the Archbishop of Canterbury, where it was actually John Milbank said that the festivals and the magic has all gone out of Christianity, and now it's just basically singing songs together and lectures about morality. That's not fun. You gotta bring the festival. You have to bring the festival back into it, and the festivals are connected to agriculture. I mean, even today we still have the remnants of these, where like state fairs, for instance, in the United States, and fairs, county fairs they have probably in England and Ireland. Those are kind of vestiges of when the world was much more aware of the agricultural cycle and much more aware of our relationship to both heaven and earth. And I can't emphasize this point enough, that without that kind of very sane view of the world, it's not just Christianity that's doomed to perish. Everything's doomed to perish, right? Then we'll all become just data points. And I think we're in the danger of that right now, just becoming absorbed into the technocracy, and the antidote to the technocracy, or Ahriman, or the archons, is what I'm talking about here, is reconnecting to the earth, reconnecting to the imagination, reconnecting to the arts, and reconnecting to a sane vision of the heavenly host of God. And with that, I will bid you a good day, and we'll see you next time.